Artificial Intelligence and its Implementation for Auditing and Financial Reporting. With us today, we have three experts who are on the ground in this area, two leaders in the implementation of AI at their respective audit firms, Will Bible from Deloitte, Sean Panson joins us remotely from PwC, Melissa Burgum from Accenture, and then moderating today's discussion will be the IAG member, Gina Sanchez. Gina, please take it away.
Great, thank you. So I thought before we dove into this conversation, I wanted to just get some definitions out on the table so that we all agree on what terms mean. And so when people say AI, it means a lot of things to a lot of people. AI is a very, very broad field of systems that mimic human intelligence. The way it goes about that is various different methodologies. You will often hear the term machine learning. That is a subset of AI that learns patterns from data. There is also deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning that learns from complex data, very using neural networks. And the reason that I wanted to put those explanations out there for you is because often when people talk about AI, they often think Copilot, they think, Gen AI. And so I wanted to help you understand that actually AI is a fairly broad area with many different areas that we talk about. And so what we are likely going to be discussing is things that land in the realm of natural language processing. Large language models are a deep learning method of natural language processing. Generative AI means you are generating new information from that information. So I just wanted you to have that. If you can just go forward one slide. A lot of people talk about AI and they sort of imagine that superior intelligence, artificial superior intelligence. We're very far away from that. We are not even yet at general intelligence. We are right now in what is called narrow intelligence. And so everything that we're going to talk about today are going to be very narrow tools that do 5 different kinds of things. And so if you go to the next slide, and this is kind of the slide, I'm only got 3 slides, so this is it. These are the general functions that you see tools currently doing today, right now. There are simple responders. You ask a question, it goes to set information, often called a RAG, and it will give you back an answer from that information. Reasoners, which will often exist in the same tool, will then take some logic and come to an explanation or an analysis for you that involves some sort of reasoning. A knowledge creator will try to create a new or novel insight from that information. In those 3 things so far, you still have a human in the loop. You're still asking questions, getting summaries, getting answers, and asking further questions. Now we're getting into where, and here, the biggest risk you take is bias, hallucination, and other systematic risks. Now, as we go further down, tool using agents. So you give your AI the ability to actually do something on your behalf. Right now, you're giving it impact. It can execute a function, right? That involves more risk. The last is an orchestrator. Orchestrators basically go through this reasoning and decide which tool it should use and then executes for you. So now you're giving it autonomy. Those are sort of the areas of risk. But when we talk about AI, generally right now they land in this taxonomy. This taxonomy is a summary of what you can find at both IBM and MIT. So I just want to say this is sort of Chantico's version. There are taxonomies out there, but this is just to help start the conversation. So let's dive into the conversation. So we have 3 esteemed panelists, Will and Sean, who are executing and innovating within their firms, and Melissa, who is managing the process on behalf of Accenture. And so let's sort of start with, and I'm going to start with Will because you're right next to me. Let's start with, talk a little bit about how you're thinking about innovation. And we have all these kinds of AIs that are now available, and they are popping up all over audit. And how do you think about what you want to accomplish and what you want to embrace as an organization, and how you think that that matches with the actual audit function, which at its heart is meant to have skepticism, and AIs are at their heart meant to make you feel good about the questions that you ask.
Start
Confirmation bias engines.
Start right with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you kind of look at the continuum of things that you put up as a slide, that's also a continuum through time.
Yeah.
So it did start at the top and has progressed through to where we are now with orchestration systems, tool usage, et cetera. And so as we've thought about each of those different steps, we've been thinking about how we embed that into audit processes that are already digitized and standardized through systems. So those processes have been set up. They embed a human in the loop by definition because they were set up before AI existed. And now we've got technology that can assist our people in executing those specific processes. And so we talked about, you mentioned at the very end, tool usage and orchestrators and autonomy. That is a choice that you can make when you implement AI technology. You can certainly have an orchestrator that can call upon different tools to execute different parts of a process. But at the end of that process, there still is an output that comes back. And so in our case, our auditors receive that output, look at that output, apply the kinds of principles you mentioned, the foundational skills of skepticism, judgment, et cetera. One of our functions is comparing information to sources. And so, by definition, we look at evidence against output and make a determination whether they match, and then whether to accept that information into documentation as part of the audit process. So we think about it in the context of overall quality control of the process, as opposed to something parallel or new or different. It is an accelerator, enabler. It does speed up some of those initial steps of data gathering, research, et cetera.
Yeah. Sean, we'll jump to you. Can you talk a little bit about how you're thinking about it at Sean, we'll jump to you. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about it at PwC in terms of what your evolution has been to date and how you've gotten to where you are here, and that decision about what risk you wanted to take as an organization and what you kind of continue to maintain human in the loop on?
Yeah. And I guess that's why everyone says the big four sounds alike sometimes, because that was a great answer, Brian. So yeah, I would say I would say spot on, very similar. I think everyone wants to talk about AI, but we always start with human in the loop. We still start with our humans are the most important aspect of quality execution. And obviously we are not taking human in the loop out of any of our processes, right? I think the way we think about it is moving very rote tasks, moving our auditors to the critical judgments and the domain expertise, while the technology is really able to take on routine tasks, mechanical execution. I would say things we could debate or whether they were value add for humans to be performing in the first place. So we think about it very similarly. I would say, the other consideration, and as we moved along the spectrum, is we have been putting the tools in the hands of all of our professionals because we do want them to become native learners and really understand the AI. It's important not just that they execute on the back end, that they understand what the AI and the agents are doing throughout the process. So again, we have our practitioners have the ability to use the tools with the same review and governance requirements on the back end, as well as we've got industrial level, orchestrated agents that we've built that allow them to execute tasks where we have a little bit more central control over the governance and the quality of the build of those tools.
Got it. And I think, it's funny, we talked about this in our prep session. Some of the tasks that it takes out, those rote tasks that you described, Sean, were probably things that were not great uses of human, knowledge. But how do you each think about the learning process, or how you junior auditors become senior auditors? I think one of the big challenges we've seen is that these tools are great if you are a senior practitioner and you can spot hallucination, but they're not so great if you're a junior practitioner still figuring out, what is right and what is wrong. And so, part of this is meant to speed up the learning process, but can you tell me how you're thinking about ensuring that your junior auditors progress to senior auditors with all the foundational skills you feel they need?
Yeah, you want me to start, Brian?
Go ahead.
Yep. So yeah, I think again, back to people being most important. And if I said we had this solved, but it is something we talk about every single day. So I think if I look already of how we've adjusted our training programs, instead of people sitting in a classroom being talked at, like the practical learning that's going on in our classroom of people actually getting to execute these things themselves without the AI to make sure they do understand exactly how the road steps work throughout is one thing we're doing. I think the thing we're doing is trying to teach critical thinking and the importance of that. Like we can't, your point's very well taken. Someone who doesn't really understand the topic, just trusting AI could present really tricky situations. So I think really working through critical thinking skills, which again, I think, that's a lot about hiring the right people and then also supplementing that with training on critical thinking, making sure they understand the why of what they're doing and the learning so that when they are assessing the AI outputs, they really know what they're looking for. So it is a challenge. I'd say it's a challenge the profession's had since we started moving work offshore. I think it's a very similar human challenge we had there when we started taking away associate level tasks and moving them to delivery centers and centers of excellence. So I think we've been on that journey already, but I think we feel good with training. And I guess the last thing is we're letting people have at bats. So they may not audit cash 100 times like some of us did when we came up, but we're making sure they get to do it a few times where we're telling them, okay, maybe in that one area, don't use the AI tool to start, like give the associate a chance to do it once or twice. Again, you don't get the benefit of 100 at bats, but you get 1 or 2. So you have at least done it.
Right. So Melissa, at Accenture, you're sort of on the receiving end of this technology and implementing on your own. And so part of what you have to do is you have to understand what's happening at the audit as part of your audit plan and sign off on that. How are you sort of dealing with that sort of governance oversight, if you will, of interacting with your auditors and helping understand how they're using, where they're using AI, how they're using AI, and what controls they have in place?
It's interesting. I think the addition of AI have made those audit plan discussions a lot more involved, right? When it was kind of the same old thing, we kind of knew what was happening, roll it forward, talk about any risks or whatever. Now, with this, we are going through it in more detail. We actually just had a session with our audit committee. Our audit committee has been asking about it, so we had a session with them last month. It was a couple of weeks ago, and we went through, our auditors are different from these two, but again, kind of consistent with the Big Four. We went through exactly where they were using it in the audit, where they used it last year, where they're using it this year. We went through the various risks associated with areas where they were using it. One of the big ones that came up that we talked about for a while, security risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
How we're making sure our data is secure and things like that. So we are going through all of those discussions. I actually have once a year I get together with our auditors and a couple key members of my team. We go through, what's changing in technology. How is that going to impact our audit? What do we need to be aware of? And we're trying to make sure we're working on both sides so that we can make it as seamless and, the best audit, highest quality possible.
Right. Which at the end of the day, it means that you still have to know what's happening, even though technology is moving along. And we talked a little bit, Will, certainly on the call about, and also Melissa, the reality of audit committees is that the set of risks you are now meant to manage has been growing and has been getting more complex for years. So in some ways, the introduction of AI as a way of synthesizing large amounts of information can be very valuable. But one of the kind of other aspects of it is that if you use AI, for example, before we used to just sample. We take a sample of information, audit it, and then come back and get a finding. Now you can audit a lot of information. And so the sort of the volume of work seems to also be increasing. I mean, Will, can you talk a little bit about the real on the ground impacts of the various kinds of AI that you use?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's important to realize that the world post AI is more complicated than the world before it.
Yep.
And so complexity is a real factor in increasing complexity in all areas and domains across organizations and our processes. But the way you handle that complexity is using the tools that you have available to you. So as companies come up a technology curve and are standardizing their systems, putting them in central repositories, putting good data governance in place. It does open the opportunity for us to go in and have connections to their systems, to pull out full populations, to do full population tests. And actually, while that may sound really scary, we still have the concept of materiality. So just because we're looking at a full population doesn't mean that we have to chase down every single reconciling item to a penny. But what it does do is it lets us do things throughout the year so we can get ahead of the process and we don't have a financial close at the very end that's got this massive spike of work. If we do detect a problem and there's an issue in an audit, it lets us get our arms around it quickly to know the extent of that problem and not have to extrapolate or otherwise look more broadly than it really is. So it leads to a faster resolution process. So looking at full populations of data where we can do it because we have synergies with investments in the issuer's financial statement systems and whatnot, can lead to a better audit process, even though the objectives of reasonable assurance are still the same.
Right. Now, who's at the receiving end of all of this is Melissa, who's getting all of the information requests. Tell me a little bit about how that's impacting your workflow around audit.
I think Will put it a good way. It could be scary, right? Yeah, for those of us on the receiving end. But we are actually seeing efficiencies in the audit. So as an example, our auditors use something called revenue transaction scoring. They look at our entire population of revenue transactions. They're not just sampling, like Gina said, just picking a few here and there. What that's doing, they look at that entire population and they have complex algorithms, a type of AI that shows what the outliers are and the areas that they should focus on. And what that's doing is it is, I believe, giving us a better audit. I think we have slightly, not a lot more findings, but slightly more findings as a result, because we're looking at the risky items and we're spending our time only on those and not some of these other things, chasing down, providing documentation for things that aren't risky and aren't going to be wrong. And so I think we're actually seeing efficiencies because our sample sizes are decreasing, but we're focused on the right things and we're getting a better quality audit out of it. Now, in our prep call, we also talked about how, okay, once you open that aperture, I think we called it a funnel, right? So you're looking at everything, and I'm glad Will mentioned materiality because it's something we talked about there too. It just makes that concept of materiality really, really important because if you are going out looking at everything, you can't go after everything or else that would be a, difficult thing for people on the receiving end.
A soul killer, we'll call that. Now, one of the things that this also kind of does is it introduces a whole host of different risks that weren't there before. Some of them are sort of systematic risks that are embedded just in the technology, risks of bias or hallucination. And that is something that I like, and when people ask me, how should I think about AI? I say you should think about it as a power tool. You need to know when it is appropriate to use, when you shouldn't use it, and when it's dangerous. And it does introduce certain risks. And so, Sean, I wonder, I'll give you the first crack at this question. Tell us a little bit about your internal AI governance and how you think about protecting from things like bias or hallucination, that can creep in to the system. And tell us a little bit about how you approach that from an organizational perspective.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I will say, as the models continue to improve, we definitely see less in the way of hallucination. So I do think the tools continue to get better. I think the other way we control that is we build the agents around the LLM. We build the context layer. And I think the other important part is the data that's being assessed is the data that we put in, right? So data quality and what's being put into these tools is still vital, just like it always would have been in an audit. And therefore, I think, if the data that we're putting in is checked and we know it's appropriate, we build the right context and we build the right agents to work with that data, I think we minimize the risk. Now, before we put out a tool, we have an extensive governance process that goes through that's reviewed for both methodology, for the quality of the engineering, the quality of the tool. We'll run substantial pilots to make sure it's working. And then to your point, though, this isn't like an old school deterministic tool where you can just build it once, software, set it, and leave. We have monitoring continually on our tools on the performance. We have a tool called Model Evaluation Tool, and it continually runs metrics daily. You could look at any point in time on the performance of the tool And then again, all that protected by the human, in the human in the loop review on the back end. So we've got substantial governance processes, but I think it is important to know this isn't our old school software development where you build a tool, you set it and you leave it. We also have the ability to continue to make enhancements. We use the findings real time to then feed back in, adjust the tools, adjust the prompts. If it did something wrong, we can immediately fix it so we don't continue to, the tool doesn't continue to make the same error.
Will, do you want to add to that?
That was a great answer.
I love how you guys are like, yeah, auditors unite. So,
Sorry, I'm not there for you, Will. Sorry, I'm not there.
I do think, though, that your point is very, very important. This notion that AI is not deterministic, right? Deterministic means I write an explicit instruction, the machine then executes that instruction, and if I give it that instruction 1,000 times, it will 1,000 times give me the exact same answer. AI is a probabilistic mechanism, which means that if the context changes, if the way that you ask the question changes, you can get different answers. And that is sort of what that governance is really trying to protect you from. So given that you are in an audience with the benefit of the board and the investor advisory group of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, can you talk a little bit about how you would like to see these risks and concerns addressed from from the regulatory and standards setting, right? But there's one thing to give the industry enough rope, but if it's enough rope to hang themselves, then nobody benefits from that. So tell me a little bit about, from your perspective, how should regulators be thinking about taking this into standard setting? I'll give it to anybody who wants to take a crack at that first.
Sean?
Oh, don't know, Bill. Will is going to go first.
I'll take it first. So, while we believe that the principles and the foundational elements of both financial reporting standards and auditing standards are strong, and those elements need to continue as they are, implementation guidance in this area is a real need. The probabilistic nature of the challenges that you mentioned lead to just some very difficult questions to get your arms around about how much is enough, what are the right quality control standards. On the issuer side, what does a deviation mean? What is a deficiency? There's just in the weeds almost, just real questions in practice that having a common unified view of how that should work will help both preparers and auditors execute against what we're going to be running up to very quickly, because this train, as Sean mentioned, the models are getting markedly better and the case for using them stronger every couple of months. So this isn't a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year cycle. It is a very fast cycle. And I think that, the human in the loop is obviously our backstop, but the volume coming through the funnel is only going to increase for everyone. So having that kind of common understanding of how much is enough and in what directions, and addressing some of these risks is a good thing for everyone.
Yeah, maybe if I just add to what Will said, yeah, I think the point of the models changing is important. And I think that's why when we look to regulation, we're hopeful it'll be about the outcomes and the broader governance frameworks. I think if you try to regulate around specific tools, the pace of change is such that that causes a lot of problems and danger. And I don't know that anyone could keep up with that. So as we think about the importance of regulation, it's got to be, the frameworks around the governance, around the tools. What does it mean for a tool to, have auditability, observability? I think those kind of features and factors and what, the regulator should expect from issuers as well as, from the practitioners will be really important to define, but define in a broad enough way that every week new technology is not going to hopefully change how that gets governed.
Great, and I'll give Melissa the last word on the sort of the how you think about it in terms of your obligation in order to issue your financials and to work with your auditors. How would you envision standard setting potentially impacting you both positively or negatively? And then I know everybody has lots of questions, and I know this is a question asking group, so feel free to start asking those questions. But so we'll give Melissa, and then we'll start with Jim.
Okay, I'll just take a minute on that because I agree with everything they said. So with the auditors, the regulations are set, the auditors follow those regulations, and then that comes down to me. So, yes, I definitely agree. Implementation guidance, I think, would be very helpful here. Broad, like Sean mentioned, so that because it is constantly changing. And we are doing our best to keep up with it. Right now, we very much have human in the loop. At my company, our CEO also actually calls that human in the lead. So I've been trying to train myself to call it in the lead. We're not just on the side over here doing something. We are actually leading it. We're getting direction to the AI. We're making sure it's not going off the rails, those types of things. Yeah, I agree with what was said. Regulations are going to have to keep pace with it.
Great. I see, Mr. Chair, you have some thoughts,
Yeah,
questions?
let me just respond to that a little bit. If I go back to Sarbanes-Oxley, when I was partner of public companies, when the new rules came about, our clients were asking us as auditors, what is it that, how do they go about and put in place controls, entity level controls, detailed controls, whatever. And we specifically said to them, we can't help you because we have to come along and audit you. And it was very frustrating, very frustrating to them, and in some ways frustrating to us because we knew internally that we had to develop what we referred to as normative models that said, okay, this is, if you're in an inventory, these are the controls that you need to have, but we could not share them with a client. So the client, the beginning, the public companies struggled. And what it came about was companies like Protiviti, some of you are familiar with them, that specialize basically former auditors that are not doing audits of companies, but they would go to these registrants and say, look, we can help you do this because we're not your auditor. And then they got to be big. They developed successful businesses. They're still around. As you know, and I've been through that experience, right? As you know, most of you know, the SEC has a consultation process. And so companies, registrants, when they have a very difficult technical issue, they can consult with the SEC. There's a process. It's a very thorough process. And the SEC will put some caveats on the information they provide, but they help them out. They say, this is what you're going to do. The PCAOB, for different reasons, I suppose, over the years, has not had a consultation process. And so one of the things that we are developing, and we need to talk more about this, and there's a process that we follow to disclose what we're trying to do, we need to develop and are discussing internally to develop a consultation process that will address exactly the issues that are brought up here. We put out a standard, right? It's not enough to put up the standard. You also have to allow an opportunity for the filers, the registrants, and also, of course, the audit firms to consult. In this case, the audit firms that would be consulting with us, not the filers directly. Okay, so this is a major part. We announced it at our open board meeting, I think it was March 31st. We said one of our priorities is to develop this consultation process, and we hope that it would be very helpful because it's extremely needed, and we recognize that.
Thank you. Sandy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I guess for me, one of the challenges, and it's a challenge we faced in talking about technology and AI here in this group and in what was the SAG a long time ago, is that I feel like we need specific examples by audit area relative to assertions to be able to really understand what's happening, right? So there's a lot in the press and the media about the use of AI and the notion of routine transactions. But the reality of it is that the assertions aren't going to change, right? But investors can't see any of this, right? So what's it going to change for investors? They can't see, is it going to change the audit report? Is it going to change what are we going to see that's going to be different, right? How are we to feel about this, right? We're supposed to feel comfortable that there's a human in the loop, or comfortable that there might be less of a human in the loop. That's really sort of where I come out on this, because I also think that it's important for the auditors to see it at the level of audit area by assertion, like, how do you use it for the trial balance? How do you use it for cash? How do you use it for investments? How do you use it in the more subjective areas, right? Because then you can map it to the auditing standards, right? Because fundamentally, consultation on the standards requires an understanding of what's actually taking place, right? As opposed to AI in the use of the audit being a marketing device, right? Because some of the same things you're saying, we're in the investment industry, right? Could say exactly the same thing. Routine transactions, we've got risk, we've got valuation, all these sort of things. I guess for me, to have a reasonable consultation from people other than the big four developing the tools, no one has any information, right? So how is that the firms, and I understand that there's proprietary tools and the like, but audit's not that different between one firm and the other. How are you going to convince people or tell people what you're actually doing? You're an audit committee chair. Are they going to tell you more than that? Are they going to tell you how everything's being done in cash or the most subjective areas? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, how do you comment?
The only thing I would say is, and somebody mentioned it earlier, if we think back to when I started 47 years ago, the first week at work, I had to learn the 10 key.
Me too.
Even though I had an MBA. And then
My calculator in a bag.
yeah, exactly. And I still have it somewhere as a souvenir. But nowadays, obviously, none of that is necessary because it's all done through automation, AI, or whatever. And we've gone through a period. I think somebody mentioned it, that we've gone through a period where a lot of this transaction work has been outsourced, and these firms are doing it in India and for the Philippines and places like that. In terms of visibility to the audit committees, I think at least when I was there, the idea was we would explain to the audit committee that this transaction work, because you have a centralized transaction center in India, was done by our Indian folks, and it was following our global standards, right? And so I think now we're evolving this. Sandra, I totally take your point. But I'm not sure that the firms are going to go out of their way to explain to the audit committees how sausage has been made, honestly. But I think you're bringing up a good question. I think it's appropriate that as audit committee, you ask that question and you ask them to give you an example to say, okay, you're auditing the reserves for doubtful accounts. Okay, explain to me what you used to do and what AI does and where does the human element come in. I think what they will tell you is, okay, we've done all the background work, we've got all the data, we've analyzed it, and now we put it in front of an experienced auditor, and they still have to make a judgment call on whether or not the reserve is ready or right. But I agree with you, and it should be done.
And Sandy, I would argue that it just because there is AI does not mean that your governance obligation to understand what's happening is in any way erased. You do have to ask the questions. And in fact, auditors, at least every audit committee that I have seen, auditors are spending quite a bit of time explaining where they're using it. I'll let Will, and I know Melissa certainly has some experience here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what you described of mapping out the audit plan from risks down to procedures, down to tools and tests is exactly what our global platforms all do. Our Omnia platform, that's what it does, and it manages that process throughout the entire audit on a global basis so that we have consistent standards and everything else. And there are, the number of use cases where it touches now, it hits more than it doesn't at this point. And we do welcome that discussion with audit committees. In fact, we're required to in certain areas of judgment and where the audit procedures are more subjective. We do go through those details, and it would include not just the AI procedures, but all procedures in that case, and what sources of evidence we look at, and what are the things that we did to mitigate those particular risks. So we've seen an uptick actually in the number of committees asking for us to talk specifically about technology, and that's generally been a good dialogue.
And we just went through this with our audit committee a couple of weeks ago. So the very thing. So once a year, I get together and my team gets together with our auditors and we go through a very thorough, it's almost a full day session on how AI or how technology is changing in the audits, what to expect. That gets rolled into our audit plan. And then we brief that, like Will said, we don't go through everything with the audit committee, but we brief them at a higher level. And they just came, we added time to the audit committee meeting for this, which is kind of precious, but we went through it. They're very interested in it. And we're going to have a separate session with them, a special deep dive session with them to talk about internal controls, like how we are handling, our internal controls are changing as a result of AI. So we're going to do that too. So there's a lot of focus on this by our audit committee anyway.
Thank you, Melissa. I see a couple of cards. Nemet, Jen, Mark, and Sandy.
So I'm curious to hear how much of AI use is leading to a cut in the new hiring, and you're seeing clients, audit clients, ask for reductions in fees as a result of AI use.
Back to you, Will. Back to you.
Back to me. Back to me. We haven't thought so. We have not thought about it as a reduction in hiring because AI doesn't replace an entire role that we have within the firm. It has effects, much like moving from a 10 key to a spreadsheet, on the amount of work that a particular person can accomplish. And of course, you then balance that against the amount of work that you have on your book, which is always changing and growing. So we haven't really thought about it from the perspective of this just wipes out a layer of roles. It doesn't, especially because we have quality control standards in place that says that every single thing that's done must be reviewed by a person. So in that regard, no, we haven't seen that, at least in the U.S. firm. The discussions about fees with clients are frankly ongoing and have been around technology for years. Yes, the headlines here make those discussions more common, but the idea that technology brings efficiency into an audit process is not new. It is offset by other things, whether they're increases in the work that need to be done, the complexity of the client, the cost of the technology itself, but it's certainly an offsetting factor that has to be considered when you think about the overall fee for an engagement.
Just to follow up, can I put the clarification on the first point? Because the initial discussion was about how AI is being used to reduce workloads, to automate certain processes. But if simultaneously certain processes are being automated, then there should be an effect on the workforce, right? Or do people just have more free time?
Well, I would think about that's one step, right? Is the efficiency, but think of two steps. The business is growing at the same time. So we may have people that get redirected to other things in the business. So you have to look at it a holistic perspective. We may have clients that are adopting AI, and now the assessment of that technology in the internal control process is an incremental task that has to be done. So while, yes, one step, you can see that the migration of data from a stack of invoices into a spreadsheet has gotten more efficient. Absolutely. That's a use case where we see this first hit. That doesn't mean that the role level in the firm is obsolete. In fact, we hire very qualified professionals that we've all said probably can do more than just the migration of data from a stack of invoices to a spreadsheet. And we're finding ways to take that talent and redirect them towards tasks. So if you look at it in a holistic perspective, you factor in the fact that we have normal attrition, it's a workforce that you can manage without having to make massive changes to it.
Yeah, I would add to that, audit is part of risk management. Risk management is a little bit like healthcare. If you make healthcare cheaper, it actually doesn't reduce the demand, it increases it. And risks are growing. And so efficiencies actually create larger and larger volumes of workflow at the other end. So at least I haven't yet seen a situation where everybody's like, woo, AI did all my work by 3 p.m. I'm going to go play golf. That has yet to happen.
Well, we won't let them do that either. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say Will's answer is great. I think it's definitely today's answer, and I think this will continue to evolve as well, right? At least for us, this is the first big cycle for 26 calendar year ends where I think most of our tools will be in use. We do not want to overreact, right? But but it is a fair question. We do think it will continue to evolve. At PwC, we've tweaked down our new entry hiring just a couple percentage points. I mean, I know that matters. Every bit matters. They're all humans, but we have tweaked it down slightly on entry level, just knowing, what's going to come in the future, and we'll be able to adapt if we need to as we watch it. But again, I think the important thing is not overreact. We're early in the cycle, and I think we'll all see this evolve. And I agree with Will's answer today, and we'll have to all watch and see what happens over the coming years.
If I can just add something, I think maybe a little bit to, I think Ken made this point earlier about the culture and people. No matter how good we get with technology and everything else, there's going to be people that are going to try to circumvent the system. And what we have to be careful about as audit committee members, obviously as investor protection folks and as regulators, that there's going to be an opportunity here, not only domestic, but many international players to try and circumvent the system. And this is the area where the audit firm it has to address, and this goes back to the additional services. I see, and going back to an earlier discussion about attracting young people to this profession, I think this is a great profession in the sense that there's going to be so many vulnerabilities out there. People don't believe half of the stuff that they watch on TV or like social media, right? Who's going to validate that? Who's going to step in and say, hey, this is a valid financial statement? What if you get financial statements on a quarterly basis or an annual report that's fake? Right? It could happen. Doesn't take long. Doesn't take much. So I would suggest, as was indicated, that the opportunities are going to be there, the needs are going to be there, the risks are going to be there, and we should be looking at AI not only as an efficiency play, but the other way, an opportunity to control more, to audit more, and to reduce risk overall.
Thanks, Jim. Jen, your
Thank you. Yeah, I wondered if, I think this is a bit of half a thought and half a question, so I hope that's okay. It strikes me this is a bit like, it reminds me of sometimes conversations that people have about how investors work, right? That we want it to still be the case that there's just a person who decides. Like there's a portfolio, I only want to talk to the portfolio manager because in my head, there's one person who's in charge. Whereas we know that in institutional investment houses now, that's just not true anymore, right? There'll be dozens of people involved, and like the way things work at scale are different, right? And people don't read annual reports like books. They just don't. They might do occasionally and pick one up, and maybe a very concentrated portfolio manager might, but systemically, that's not how it works. So if it's the case, it sounds like that fundamentally the mechanics of how audits get done are going to change as a result of this. And the locus of like, maybe it's less the audit partner now, and this plays into your need to do firm-wide as well as file review, and it all kind of links together. Like, how does the PCAOB think about what you guys will need to do differently to respond? Because this is clearly going to happen. It's happened in the way investment management works. It sounds like it's already happening here. Like, we can't just fall back to, okay, but I still want the audit partner to tell me the answer anymore. Or is that not it? Because the human in the loop is still the audit partner.
Well, it gets complicated, obviously, and I don't pretend to have all the answers. But the first thing that comes to mind is, and we've gone through this process a little bit, we need to do more. We have to ask ourselves the question, how many of our 500 inspectors have any concentrated or meaningful knowledge of AI?
Yep.
Right? You need to start there, because when you go out and audit these firms or inspect these firms that are using AI extensively and control, as was mentioned, controls are based on AI or performed by AI, the person who is doing the inspection needs to understand what that means. So we need to start there. We need resources. We need to train existing inspectors on AI. And we just started thinking about it, right? We need to do a lot more in terms of training. And you heard the firm talk about, or firms talk about platforms. Each one of these firms do most of their work now on a global, consistent platform. We need to train our people to understand their platform. When they go out and visit a specific or inspect a specific firm, they need to be experts in that platform, at least as good as the auditors themselves, right? If not better. And then we need to invest in technology to have a platform of our own. How are there's opportunities for us to be more effective, perhaps more efficient as well, in terms of what we do. And the one thing comes to mind is, and I haven't thought through this a lot, we haven't talked about it a lot, but we talk about QC 1000. Okay, so QC 1000 theoretically, you can put it on a platform, you can put it on some automated process, you can get the information from the firms, and you can do a lot of this work in advance before you go out and you inspect the firm, before you start asking questions, because the standards are going to be the same. The steps that one has to put in place for QC 1000 is going to be the same. And chances are most of the responses and the steps that the firms are going to have in place are going to be similar, if not the same, right? Just think about the opportunities you're able to automate this process. And we were talking earlier about best practices, providing value to the profession. Think about best practices one as the regulator can come up with as we do these inspections in an automated way to say, well, you know, all of you should be thinking about this. So long story short, we're at the beginning of it. We're thinking about it. We need the right resources. We need the right training. It's a huge opportunity. On the other hand, it's a big challenge for us because the reality is the firms are ahead of us at this point in time. We haven't invested in AI as much as we need to. This is a big, big priority for us.
Thank you, Jim. Mark?
So I appreciated Gina's point about the bias and hallucinations, although it's also a good reminder that people are biased and hallucinate a lot too. So ultimately, the real question is, does the AI hallucinate less than the people, or the bias than the people? And for instance, you know, so again, I come from more financial services world, and certainly if you think about consumer finance, the move broadly from manual underwriting to automated underwriting has unquestionably reduced bias. So that's been a progress. The question I kind of have, two-part, because there's a regulator question at the back end of it, which is how much in the building of the models are you back testing against audits you've done without AI? And if you aren't, is part of that a concern? Like, you know, I would like us to have an environment where were you to use the AI to back test previous audits you've done and discover that you've reached different conclusions, that, you know, we're not going to come out and ding you for something that looks off manually. Now you now discover AI catching those biases that would have existed before. So how do we create this environment? I don't want to quite say regulatory sandbox, but create an environment where you can be more forthcoming about using AI to discover how you might not have done something the best way before, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. Well, I think, you know, certainly when I mentioned before we release any tool to the practice, we are running a ton of pilots. And even as we're building and training the tool, we're doing that on historical audit data where we have the proper authority and rights from our clients. So I think your answer is spot on. And I think that's where we're testing, you know, how effective the tools are working and improving them. You know, we're seeing quick improvement in the performance as we continue to train with further and further data. So I think I can't say we've redone it, you know, we haven't redone an entire audit because I don't think AI is in every piece end to end of the audit, but we certainly, as we're rolling out individual audit experiences and tools, we're certainly using historical data. I think we're going to see an enhancement of quality over time. I really do believe that. And I think we are seeing, or I don't want to say we found errors because we haven't found errors in historical. The tools have pointed out interesting thought points or questions for our teams to ask that required clarification that just may not have been perfectly clear in prior year documentation. So while it didn't point out an error, it certainly improved the staff going to ask the client a better question the next time, a more pointed question. And that may have just required some additional documentation to be clearer, you know, or it could point out ultimately, you know, something the client needs to look closer at. So I don't think we're not ignoring historical. Obviously, we have risk policies around how we do that, but I do think we're certainly leveraging historical human performed audit as we test and build these tools.
Thank you. Jason?
Yeah, thanks, Saba. So, I mean, all three of your firms are on the cutting edge of this technology, right? Either as auditors, preparers, as consultants coming in and helping implement how do we all think as investors helping the PCAOB board, what's going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years? I mean, I know the SEC is looking at maybe even, making IPOs great again and cutting back quarterly reporting. But obviously, it's much easier as a preparer right now to get at your information. It's much easier as an auditor, as you noted, to look at that on a continuous basis. And I'm sure you have your business plan for what this looks like in 3 to 5 years. Am I going to get an audit opinion that's better than reasonable assurance? Am I going to get it on a more frequent basis? How do you see this going with the implementation of technology? And I guess I would also say, in addition to having some kind of, framework or standards from the PCAOB so you can implement it in your audits, right? And feel like you're doing that in good conscience, following the standards, and you're not going to be in trouble, maybe in the future administration for doing that. How can they provide guidance in whatever rulemaking they do over the next few years to help you with the future as well, that 3 to 5 year outlook? Because I think you have a pretty clear view on what you think it's going to look like.
Well, yeah. I think 3 to 5 years is too long to forecast in this environment, and I say that because, what I would have forecasted 6 months ago has changed in the last 2 months. And that's just because it's not because of the audit firm or regulation or anything else. It's because of the underlying technologies. The underlying technologies have taken stair-step changes. And if that continues, it opens up a whole lot of potentials that maybe weren't potentials before. So we kind of have to accept that we're in a period of some significant uncertainty in terms of all business operations, not just audit, but where those things will be in 3 to 5 years. That being said, the profession is responsive both to what stakeholders ask for through regulation or what they ask for through, actually asking us to do things. So if there is a market demand for more frequent audit opinions, more expansive scope, more, call it timely audit opinions, I think the profession will be in a position to do those things. But it isn't. Right, we do what is demanded by the market and regulators. And so, with all things AI, what we're seeing, we talked about the funnel concept. The amount of information being pushed through the funnel is just going to explode, and there's opportunity there. There's opportunity to improve products and services, broadly speaking. And the question is, does that happen or not?
Thank you, Will. Gary?
I love the idea of using AI to do things humans do, but do it faster, counting widgets, reconciling accounts. But is there an opportunity to radically change what happens? I think about every receivable on my books is a payable on someone else's. Every loan I've got is an asset on someone else's balance sheet. Is there an opportunity to have a clearinghouse where we can quickly go through, and I think that would take care of, I don't know what percentage of the audit that takes place, but have some way to handle that? Or
Yeah. So just maybe not an AI problem, more of a data consistency and standardization problem. One of the things that we do in our audit approach for investment funds is we work with the brokerage houses and the custodians to obtain full sets of records and reconcile them against fund positions. So when you have good evidence sets that you can access, it does open up, full population auditing on an automated basis, which drives all the things I talked about timeliness, speed, efficiency, full scope, those kinds of things. You find rare instances of that in the economy writ large. There's not many places where you can find full populations of good, reliable external evidence to source from. But when we can, absolutely, that is part of advanced auditing techniques, whether it's AI or not. I think AI can scan over those things much quicker. So if you had 1 million securities, you might be faster than sending somebody through the line items. But the key is getting the 1 million securities. And that's what we look for as opportunities for kind of data connections and whatnot.
Thank you. Satyam, and then David.
So it seems pretty clear to me, based on what I'm hearing, that the issues raised here go, I think you suggested this, Mr. Chairman, directly to the heart of QC and ultimately to the integrity of financial reporting. I'm curious, and as an observer, what does the PCAOB collect today on the nature and extent of firms' AI usage what does it report to the public? Just scanning the website as an observer, I'm not sure. It doesn't seem like it does, at least in terms of reporting to the public, but perhaps, I know the staff aren't here, but maybe the board members might be able to educate us on what's the state of collection today and transparency, and that will sort of help us come up with some ideas for you and how we could improve that, because I think there is tremendous interest here. If there's no ready answer to that, that's fine too.
The only thing I would say is this is part of our discussion around modernizing the process, the inspection process. We don't have a natural way of getting out. We have information that the firms have come and talked to us about. Case in point, last week in Paris, most of the presentation that the Big Six made to us involved audit, AI. And most of the questions that came from the regulators in the room, 90% of them related to the AI aspects of their audits. But I can't say that we have any database or such at this point that we can share with anyone.
So I wanted to just offer a couple of suggestions on how you might achieve that and defer to you all in the method, because I think that more information would be very helpful to us as investors. The first is you could incorporate questions and targeted questions regarding the use of AI into the inspections program. I would think that work papers would provide some information about how it's being used today. I'm curious your all's thoughts on that point, how it would be reported in work papers, how that would be analyzed by the board. And then second, another idea which board member Botik has suggested is consider whether enhanced disclosure, more standardized enhanced disclosure is necessary, perhaps analogous, and maybe you could explain your speech under Form AP. And I think Jeff had, suggested the same thing. But I think the bottom line is we would love more transparency on this. And it would be something that would be of great interest to us, but curious, would defer to you all on exactly the method in which you do that, whether it's something standardized like disclosure or something more targeted like the inspections program.
Yeah, and maybe just from our side, and again, I know I'm not answering directly on the public, but for each inspection, we do disclose to the PCAOB what tools were used and where AI was used in the audit as well. I know we have, and we'll probably would confirm, we've been spending a lot of time with the PCAOB inspections team and leadership, demoing our tools, really talking about what we're doing, and for the purpose of hopefully educating and everyone understand where the firms are at and to help educate the PCAOB on their journey of education. So I know it doesn't answer your public, but I just did want to be clear that we disclose that. That's something disclosed in each inspection. Again, historically, we've done that with tools, and now it's added in with where we're using AI in the audit, and certainly that's part of the inspection process.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say in the context of what I said earlier, the let's say the training programs, but also the specific task of modernizing our inspection process, we would continue to engage with the accounting firms to learn from them what they're doing in terms of AI, because we need to bake it into our modernization output. So this is a critical element of what we're looking at, right? So understanding what they're doing, understanding the technology, investing in technology ourselves, and investing in training and education.
Thanks. David?
Oh, well, you're probably going to like my comments there. No, I think as investors, we should be extremely excited about the advent of AI in the audit and in issuers, finance, and accounting departments. I just think it's going to lead to higher quality financial reporting and more give us more confidence in what's coming back. The challenge right now is we're in a transitional period, and it's new, and it's in some ways scary, and we'll get through this. And I think the PCAOB needs to decide how to go about it, but there's no end to this. It's going to continue, but I think it's an exciting development for investors. And all the systems that I've seen that are being developed by either the agents that are being developed within companies or the startups that are attacking aspects of record to report or what have you, Everything is completely auditable. They're doing it designed to understand that it's got to be an open book. In fact, I think it's going to be more auditable and more observable than the work papers that we're all accustomed to in companies right now. But we're in a transition period, and that's concerning. So I don't want to mitigate any of the concerns that people have, but I do want to make sure that we don't get too down on it, because I think it's just going to be terrific for investors.
It's very helpful. Will, would you like to finish your thought?
I totally, David, I think that's a great point. We should keep thinking about that. And maybe one question that hasn't come up, I always think about this, given as was indicated, given the advancement in technology, right? At what point in time can you get most of the audit, if not all of it, fully automated? Yeah. Who's going to come out there and say, I can do an audit? Forget building the number 6 and 7 and 8 and top 10 firms in the world. I can be one of them, and I can do Google, and I can do 80% of it, because at the end of the day, the only thing I need to do is go find some specialists, some experts from the accounting firms, pay them well, bring them in to make the judgment calls. The rest of it is fully automated. That day might come. I mean, it might not come in my lifetime, but it will come.
Thank you, Jim. Sandy, Peters, George, and Jen.
I raised my card for another reason. And I totally agree with you, David. The challenge, though, that I face in my day-to-day world is that despite all of this happening, we're told from the SEC investors are overloaded with information. We should go from quarterly to semi-annual reporting. We should reduce the number of disclosures. So it's sort of, we're living in like two different worlds. You know what I mean? That's the really challenge that I have. And the comment that's in our Reg SK letter is, you guys need to be talking about technology, and you're making it pretty clear you're not talking to investors about how they're using financial statements, right? So that's the challenge. It's like, oh, we're in this world of information, except we can't get any more of it, right? And it should be cheaper than ever and better than ever, right? It's just a point of frustration for me. But the question I was going to ask for Will and the like was, what do you think this does to the need for credentials like the CPA exam? The CPA, not the exam, but the exam that tests that. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I might have an interest in it,
Sure. Well, a couple things. I also want to take the response about a technology firm automating the audit. Certainly, you can achieve accuracy and validation, but independence is a qualitative characteristic, right? And your auditor has to be independent of you, and that's why people stand behind those opinions and rely on them. So I think that even if you were able to create the straight through processing and audit, and let's say we get there through investment and financial systems at issuers and all those kinds of things, there's a need for someone to be accountable and independent at the end. And that's what that certification is about, because the certification comes with it professional responsibilities. Right? So the certifications are absolutely crucial to continue to communicate trust to the people that are using audit opinions, and that there is a accountability, and there are ramifications if you don't execute on those accountabilities, like losing your license. The question about whether a CPA partner or the firm is responsible. Well, a partner is responsible because it's their livelihood when they sign that opinion. That's intended to be a significant motivator towards following the standards and responsibilities. So regardless of the technology used, those qualitative characteristics are super important. Now, what we need to train CPAs to do clearly needs to change. And the things we've heard about, the risks of using AI, applying critical thinking, applying judgment, how to interpret, we have to double down on those things rather than, in some cases, maybe the factual information of a particular accounting standard where you can easily obtain that information. So I think that the CPA certifications need to continue to evolve. The CPE requirements need to continue to evolve to keep up with pace. But it's crucial to having audit opinions that you have a professionally certified, independent party that's executing against it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jen and then Alicia.
Thank you. I mean, I agree. I think it's very exciting. And, you know, every other big technological leap forward in the end has been a great thing. Right? There's some bumps along the road. That's fine. One thing I wanted to ask about and encourage, I think, the PCAOB is, and this is something I would say to all audit regulators around the world, but you're the only ones here. So you're getting, I hope you are. Hello, everyone else, if you are listening. I'm slightly concerned that the firms are way ahead of the regulators on this. Noted. I agree that you need to invest heavily in getting upskilling, getting your own systems. I think it would be a good idea as soon as possible and as publicly clearly as possible to get some independent, non-Big Four AI experts to be involved in your thinking about it. Because I worry about, like, don't let this be a way that the profession drifts back to regulating itself. Because if they are the only ones who know how it works, and they're doing the forefront of all the thinking, and then, you know, they're teaching the regulators how to regulate them, I'm sure that, you know, they're all very ethical people, and that is at least at a minimum a perceived independence threat for the PCAOB, right? So, like, do you plan to use some of your own experts as well that are fully independent of the firms?
Great. I think it's a great point. If you think about the ecosystem and what's developing here, right, and what we're talking about here, and keeping in mind that for the smaller firms, it's almost impossible for them to develop some of these things because they just don't have the funds. And they're going out with private equity trying to gain most of the funds. In fact, most of them, the rationale, if you talk to them about why do you need private equity, they will tell you because we need to improve our technology, including AI, to compete with a Big Four or six, right? So it's right on point. But it's hard to imagine that they can catch up to the Big Four. So the only entity in the ecosystem, and this goes back to the viability and the need for the PCAOB, is the PCAOB, right? It's us. It's the regulator. But we need to have the right resources. We need to have those independent, right, AI experts that are going to help us not only develop the tools and the methodologies to inspect the firms, but also make sure that we're close enough and understand what they're doing, right, to be effective, right? Because at the end of the day, what we need to do is we need to say to them, hey, by the way, you need some boundaries here. This is what you're doing with AI, but there's an issue. And there's where we come in to say, hey, and to the point earlier, we may need to come up with some standards, some auditing standards that don't exist, right? So this is what we're going to work on. Honestly, at this point in time, I'm not sure that I can tell you because I'm relatively new here where exactly we are, but it's a huge priority for us.
It strikes me, I wonder if there's an opportunity to leverage what is being done by other independent regulators in different sectors, right? Like, could you, for example, what are the banking and insurance regulators doing about use of AI? And can those experts help you challenge the firms? I don't know if they're doing anything, but like, I just worry that the sort of self-review threat of it feels quite acute. And I'm sure it's all very well-meaning, but it feels kind of.
There is. Maybe I'll note as part of my background, I represented OMB at the White House AI conversations. And in my role as chief statistician, I worked with Census Bureau and others on their AI, collecting their data, and worked with the bank regulators. It's very early, but there is an attempt to share across government, you know, what you're learning AI. I mean, we're going to run into what everybody's running into is that there are only a limited number of individuals that we'll all be bidding for. But as more and more individuals get up to speed, more and more individuals can be hired. But there's definitely a cross-government opportunity and coordination going on. Obviously can be improved and will continue to be improved.
Great discussion. Alicia, Damley, and George, and I think we're almost at time, so.
I'm intrigued by Will's response with respect to the profession and this concept of needing the independent auditor because the independence is so important. But I have to wonder whether both the PCAOB and the profession may actually find themselves in the situation of having to think about this very differently. Because if, say, at some point in the future, sooner rather than later, if 100% of the transactions, whether it's receivables, payables, smart contracts, et cetera, where both sides of that transaction is independently verified before it even hits the audit team, first of all, you could actually have continuous availability of financial information. Right? That's a very real premise here. Don't know whether we want a day-by-day balance sheet and income statement, but there's the possibility. And two, the cost will come down, and again, we'll be inundated with data, but presumably we'll have tools to analyze that data better. But I think the bigger question in my mind is, how do the roles change, right? Because we're talking about things within the context of how things are done now and the availability of this information, and perhaps the oversight required, and perhaps the way in which the public accounting firms reinvent themselves in this new world might necessitate a different perspective as well. So in other words, I think we want to be solving for next year's problems, not last year's issues.
I couldn't agree more. And I think you heard from the accounting firms, and I heard it last week in Paris, that the change, the pace of change is accelerating. And they're talking now, changing technology within months, not years, right? So I think all of those are legitimate questions and legitimate opportunities, and we have to work together. And it's in so many ways, maybe going back to David's point earlier, it's also exciting for us. I mean, me personally, and I know my team, we're energized to see how this modernized approach would work, because I think it would give us as regulators an opportunity to work closer together with our regulators around the world, regulators in other places within the government. The opportunities are incredible. But we need resources to be able to do that. We need the right resources, and as was, perfectly stated, there's limited resources out there. And those that have more money to throw at those resources, namely the private firms, the public accounting firms, they have an advantage.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. George, and then any parting thoughts?
Great, thank you. Great conversation. And I just wanted to pick up quickly and just curious if this is the right way to think about this, is the way I'll phrase the question. Because, you mentioned a couple times it's just come up about the speed of change, and it struck me 2 months ago or 6 months ago, you couldn't have predicted what's happening now. And presumably that's just is going to keep accelerating. And with that, do we get to the point, I mean, like in the next 24 months, maybe 36 months, in the relatively near term, where the question will not be the technology, and whether it's the firm or even the preparer, Melissa, maybe this will be a preparer question, because I've heard some things from preparers, that the technology is going to be a point that actually we're pretty comfortable at getting the right answer. And so the human in the loop, and I love the human in the lead, or human on the loop, as I've heard it characterized, is going to be truly a conscious decision, because executives at the firm or companies, there'll be enough experience that we're comfortable that, it's even at being probabilistic, it's going to get the right answer. So now where today the human in the loop is, I think we all would say, is needed, but there may be a point a few years out, maybe sooner, I don't know, and this is my question, that it will be literally a conscious decision by your CEO to say, no, I want to do it this way, versus we can save a lot of cost. We can cut a lot of things out and be a lot more efficient and just let the computer do its thing. And here's my real question. I'll pause. From an outside perspective, whether it's looking at a firm, because maybe the firms get in different places or companies get in different places, would one, A, does that make sense? And B, the companion question, from a risk perspective, from a regulator or from an investor, how should one think about that? If that what I'm suggesting is plausible, at least.
First, okay. Sure. The hypothesis is fair, right? And I think that is the pressing question that people are looking at, not only in accounting practice, but certainly on the finance transformation side. I mean, that is the investment thesis, right? So it's a very fair question. On the auditing side, going back to, yes, accuracy is important, but accountability is too. And when auditors look at evidence, they don't just look at accuracy. They look at the substance of the evidence. And so I don't know I don't know what I don't know about the models. So I just have to always caveat that because something could come out in a year that changes our perspective. But at this moment, I don't really trust them to look at something and be able to detect something out of the ordinary. I feel pretty good about pulling dates and numbers off of screens and putting it into templates, but I don't expect it to notice the thing that's out of context. And so the role of a person in doing that and evaluating primary audit evidence is not being challenged at this moment. Could that change because of the hypothesis that technology is moving so fast that in 24 months it can? I can't sit here and say it won't. So I think that is the question of how much is enough. Control and oversight is the pressing question, both for issuers putting in internal controls as they do financial information, and ultimately will be for us at some point in time in the future.
And we are considering that in our internal control framework. So right now we very much have the human in the loop or human in the lead. And that's designed into everything where we're implementing AI, but we see a future where that's not there or it becomes less and less. And the humans are really kind of monitoring the whole thing to make sure that it's working. So our audit partner, even when he presented a few weeks ago to our audit committee, even said, right now it's humans with, being assisted by AI. Right. Next phase is teaming, right? So it's machines and humans working together. And then that final phase is the machines are really doing all the operational stuff and the humans leading it. So I think we're going to get there. Probably faster than 36 months, just the way technology is moving. So we're already starting to think about it in the areas where we have the humans in the lead. How much longer do we need to do that? What are we doing? So, but we do have to make sure it doesn't, it stays, we have to monitor it to make sure it's still doing what it's supposed to be doing. That's the biggest thing. So we'll always have that piece.
Yeah, I would agree with everything said, right? It's how fast, but the responsibility and the accountability, I think we have to keep considering. I also think the firms need to move quickly because we have to keep up with the preparer community as much as we talked about the PCAOB keeping up with the firms, right? Like the way I look at it is my clients are changing at very different paces as well, but the ones that are quick and out front, like the firms, we have a responsibility to be prepared to continue to audit them using, the standards available to us today. So I think, the point of, are we moving fast? And so the profession is also trying to keep up with the preparer community. But the point of like full end-to-end audit, push a button, that's going to be dependent, right? The preparer community is all over the place as well, with their sophistication with AI and their use and their system. So I think as a firm, we'll need to continue to be flexible to meet our clients where they are, depending on where they're headed on this technology journey.
Yeah, and I'll take the moderator's privilege on the last word. I'll throw a little bit of a dampener on the conversation in the sense that that there is still quite a bit. We're in the very early innings of AI adoption and what that means for our workflow. And right now, everything looks very rosy. But what I will say is that there is still a significant amount of actual infrastructure that has to be built in order to get to this world where everything is digital, everything is on chain, everything is observable, GDP can be done in seconds. We're so far away from that, and we are billions and billions of dollars of AI infrastructure away from that, and data centers away from that, and people with their NIMBY sign saying, I don't want a data center in my community. And so there's a broader perspective to this conversation that we could very quickly utilize the infrastructure we have, just given the early stages of the adoption cycle that we're seeing. It could be huge, everybody could want it, but there could still be some sand that could get thrown in the gears. So I'll end with that little downer note, but generally I'm pretty optimistic.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you to our esteemed panelists. This was very, very helpful, and I'm sure there are going to be many more follow-up discussions on this topic because it's ever-changing. Thank you. So we'll do a quick transition. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
So if you could all turn to page 4 of the slide deck, we have the questions up there. Next on the agenda is a session on the strategic plan for 2026 to 2030. As mentioned earlier, on March 31st, this year, the new board initiated a process to develop a strategic plan for the next couple of years, and requested public feedback on that. We already discussed questions 1, 2, and 3. So we'll try to make sure that we go through the next couple of questions. I know the IAG is working on a comment letter and some members are doing their individual comment letters, but this discussion will help us. So question 4, what standard setting projects should the PCAOB pursue? And who would like to go first to answer that question? I don't want to call people out, so it's better if you volunteer because I know you guys like to talk. Alicia?
So hopefully this is not just for my own edification, but as I kind of think about what's been happening around the world over the last 10 plus years, we're seeing more and more convergence, right? Whether that's in accounting standards, whether that's... Sure. We're seeing a lot of convergence, whether that's in accounting standards, whether it's in other areas. You know, I'm always struck by the financial sector, specifically the banking sector, as we moved sort of to this concept of Basel standards and the BIS to now the FSB, where there's this kind of collaboration at the global level. And I would suggest that accounting doesn't care about geography, right? Accounting standards are agnostic with respect to geography. Sector can sometimes play an important role in terms of fine-tuning the accounting standards. But for the most part, you know, across the world, and that's partly why IFRS made so much sense and brought so many countries along. So within that context, one of the things that occurred to me when I saw this, this question was, is there a survey necessary in terms of thinking through what standards the PCAOB currently has, and to bench that or compare that against, are there gaps? Where are those gaps? Or where's the PCAOB ahead of others? And whether there might be an opportunity to have this kind of preliminary conversation with peers to then think about the next steps. I don't know what the answer to that is, but it seems to me that that would be a good idea within the context of considering other aspects of the strategic planning process.
Yeah, I guess I'll respond. First of all, the initial information that we put out there in terms of a strategic plan and requesting comments, there were 4 key priorities, right? The first priority for us is to finalize, or let's say make the revisions through the process for QC 1000, so that we can begin to think about re-engineering or modernizing the inspection process, which is priority, not number 2, important, but 2 in terms of the strategy, right? Number 3 is we talk about harmonization, to your point, right? Convergence. So we want to make sure, because, for example, last week when I was in Paris and the big 6 firms presented there, I guarantee you, maybe they had talked about this in advance, but every one of them put on the list fragmentation of standards. And what they said is, we are putting together this global platform to standardize the audit and make it more efficient and effective, improve audit quality. But what gets in the way is fragmentation of standards. Can you please get together, all of you, as regulators, as accounting bodies, auditing bodies, whatever, and do something about it? So I can tell you it's a big priority for us in the strategy. We're working with the SEC because the SEC has made some comments about how they want to invest and pursue global harmonization. So we're doing that. The survey that you're suggesting, or the approach you're suggesting, would make a lot of sense. We have sort of started there. One of the first questions that I asked is, can you show me next to each other, where are we different, specifically as it related to ISQM 1 and QC 1000, because obviously that's a big deal. And we're moving towards that. We will definitely, in our strategic plan and the budget, put in additional investments in this area, because it should be helpful to the filers, to the registrations, to the entire process. Ultimately, we need to harmonize it. And by the way, as since we talked about inspections earlier, and there were questions whether it was China or other places, the inspection process outside of the United States and the related risks, we do most of those inspections ourselves from here. And the reason we do them from here is because many, if not all, I would say many for now, not to get in trouble, but many of the regulators around the world don't have the resources to do the inspections and the work that we do here. And so it would be easy to say, okay, well, now I'm going to go to France. There's no reason for us to go to France. We'll rely on the French regulator to do the inspections, in theory. But we are nowhere close to having all of these regulators around the world ready to do that. So if you think about it in terms of standards, the goal should be to harmonize the standards as much as we can. You know, we are in a globalized world after all. The inspection process should be, our goal should be to work together with the other regulators and to try to rely on one another as much as possible so that we don't duplicate the effort. Just think about the need for somebody asked the question about resources, right? Think about an inspection that takes place in a country where English is not the spoken language. We need to employ translators. Well, it's a challenge finding the right people and doing it the right way. So yes, I think directionally we want to go there. It's a very big priority for us. And hopefully at the next meeting or 2 meetings from now, we'll be able to report back to you what progress we have made in that regard.
Yeah, if I can add one thing, it was announced by the chairman at the open meeting that as part of the subsequent solicitation for comment on the strategic plan, we're also going to be issuing a standard setting agenda consultation. So that will be a good opportunity for us to put something forward and then the general public to react on where there might be those divergences between the standards and where we might be able to focus moving forward to bring those together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Sandy?
Just a question about that topic in particular. The International Assurance Audit Standards Board, is that the centralized global area where all this converges?
So I was on the PIOB, which oversees the IAASB and the IASBA, right? So the challenge.
I'm on the UAG.
I don't know what the UAG, Users Advisory Group for IFER. That's for IFER, isn't it?
Any other IASB.
Okay. So the challenge is the vast, I'll say, as an organization, CFA Institute, we love international accounting standards. We wanted global standards. We would love global auditing standards, but standard setting is a political process.
Yes,
right?
very much.
And sometimes the politics don't work in our favor, right? So the issue with international standards is that they are, for the most part, developed by the profession for the profession. So they are similar to the legacy standards of the AICPA, right? So they've been funded mostly by the profession. The PIOB, so they've been created by the IAASB and IASBA, which is the ethics. They've been moved out of under IFAC, which is the accounting organization, International Federation of Accountants, moved under an organization called IFIA, under PIOB, which was supposed to ensure the public interest. But it's all voluntary, and that system's having money problems, right? So the challenge is that it seems like in America right now, we're going to make America great again, except in auditing standards. We want to converge. We want to converge. Just a little cheeky, but true. It's kind of ironic, right? So, you know, I was on the PIOB. I think its mission is great. I believe in the work, but a lot of the standards have been developed by the profession for the profession. And I think that the PCAOB has to be mindful of that. We are mindful of that as an investor organization, that some of those things may not, they're opposite of the reason why the PCAOB was created. And so while certainly we would love for these things to be more consistent, we would like them to be more consistent relative to the interests of investors as opposed to the profession. So that's the challenge that we see from an organization that loves international. I mean, if you go back 15 years, we were all in on IFRS. IFRS has been very good for investors globally. But unfortunately, you know, there's a lot of conversation right now about merging the IASB and the IAASB in circles. I'm not sure that's a good idea because they both are having money problems, and two things with money problems together, we all know, has been in mergers, doesn't make a solution necessarily. And as I reminded at the IFRS Advisory Council last week, a lot of the people funding one are funding the other. So when you merge them, you're not going to have just an elimination of costs. You're going to have an elimination of revenue because they're like, oh, well, you have cost savings. I shouldn't have to fund as much, right? So there's big challenges there associated with that. So ideally, I like it, but there's a lot of politics associated with that and a lot of politics that have to be worked out. The irony is, despite all the kerfuffle from Congress about the funding under SOX of the FASB and the PCAOB, they're the best funded regulators in the world, right? And they're the most independent. And in my view, they've done the most to improve audit quality, because not all audit regulators are the PCAOB, right? We saw that in Wirecard, right? So I'm like, yes, but we all need to be aware of what those challenges are politically, is what my, globally, it'd be great if the CAMs were the same, right? I prefer QC 1000 over ISQM 1. They won't talk about audit quality metrics. We like audit quality metrics. We like better firm reporting. You might see those in our letter. So for me, those are the bigger questions than the standards, right? Because recently in an interview about the reconfiguration of the IAASB, I said two things that matter to me: governance and funding. When you get those right, then you can get the standards right. Without governance and funding, it's kind of like not worth talking about yet. That's my personal perspective, having been involved in both.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to articulate it. Thank you so much for doing that, because I learned a lot last week about all of that. And I have an offer. We'll do all the funding as long as you can eliminate the politics. I'm just joking. I'm just. I'm kidding.
Amy, and then Jen and Alicia.
Thanks. I just have a quick one, and it piggybacks off of something that Sandy said. It's not a new standard. It's, I think, maybe clarification or underscoring the importance of CAMs. And I think Jeff's valiant efforts over the years to increase and highlight really good CAMs, I think, is going a long way. But I believe maybe more support and clarification from the PCAOB could really underscore the importance of this incredible disclosure to investors, that we have just seen a little bit more boilerplate than I think was originally intended. And it's maybe less political since it's already in there. So I would encourage the PCAOB to focus a little bit on that if that's possible. Thank you.
That's a very good idea, Amy. Jen?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, on the international piece, I think I broadly agree, although I think I'm just more optimistic that it's fixable. I don't think it's as broken as that made it sound, Sandy, but there's challenges for sure, and there's a lot of work being done. No, fair. But it is political. It is. But I think there's some ways forward on that, and I think it's great that the US is involved. I think from an international investor perspective, there's a little bit of nervousness about the US suddenly deciding to get involved. And I would encourage you all, we welcome to the international, but come and join it. Don't try and roll over it. I think that would be a good way. What I would observe from having been, investment is completely global, like you said, right? The accounting it's not a regional issue, is that the best application of the international standards is where you have a really robust local endorsement process. And that's true of the accounting standards and auditing standards, right? So again, your real peers in the UK and Japan, etc., will take the international standard, make appropriate tailoring, and that's probably a good balance, I would think. Because the other real difference is that most of the international standards are very principles-based. And this is quite a rules-based environment. So finding a way, I think, to effectively bridge that gap will be important. It's not to say that you couldn't have more of a principles-based approach, but that would be a big shift to navigate, I would suggest. And another on CAMS, and I'd agree, that's actually another one where the way that that's interpreted in different countries is different. And the UK FRC have just made some changes to the reporting requirements on essentially introducing kind of like a graduated findings type element to CAMS. No one's reported on that yet, but if that worked, that would be a huge step forward for investors compared to what we've gotten, because they're not uniquely unhelpful in the US CAMS. They are also in many other places.
Alicia, and then Gina, Lemon.
If I remember GAS correctly, unlike GAAP, it is actually more rules-based. You know, you will be independent. There's no gray area around some of these requirements. So it seems to me that, notwithstanding the political will aspect, if you can get the IASB and the kind of progress that's been made around IFRS and the incredible adoption in the rest of the world, GAS should be even easier. It's less complicated. It's narrower, it's less complicated. And the big difference here is that the firms have a vested interest, right? Because Wirecard should not have happened, essentially. The primary reason, or at least appears to be the primary reason, was that the GAS standards were different across the different countries, and therefore what the auditors were allowed to do essentially meant that basic confirmations went unchecked. You know, I think we look at it from a North American, or at least I look at it from a North American perspective and go, excuse me? But those are the GAS standards there. So I think I come back to this, you know, to kind of the reasoning that I offered with respect to what standard setting projects should be undertaken, is to first literally do a survey. Because I really do think, you know, if you can create the BIS and then within that create the FSB and adoption of those Basel standards, right? It's a common good aspect. And surely financial reporting is a common good across the world, and even more broader than protecting the financial system in terms of users, et cetera.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that we intend to invest more in this area of harmonization, convergence, whatever you want to call it. Obviously, for us on the auditing side as opposed to accounting. And what we've been thinking about, this hasn't developed anywhere, but it needs to, is what areas can we work together on that makes the most sense? And currently, even based on this conversation, technology seems to be the most important one, where both obviously the accounting firms and the regulators, us and all the regulators, have an interest in working together to figure out, you know, some of the complexities that we talked about and the related standards that we may need around that. So it's very high on our list for sure.
Thanks. Gina?
So currently the PCAOB is publishing statistics around the term just escaped my head, kind of risks that are forming either sectorally or globally with regard to the findings in our inspections. And one of the things that I think about when I think about sort of a way to sort of find hotspots is whenever your auditor comes in, as anybody who's been chair of the audit, you have a meeting with them and they'll ask you, do you think there's anything, is there anything we should be focusing on? So that's always that first question that you get. in a well-governed organization, you will have some kind of whistleblower tip line that gives you kind of opportunities to make inspections internally. In a well-governed organization, those get inspected and you kind of take care of those. In a poorly governed organization, those don't get inspected. However, there's no real political disclosure either to investors or outside the organization when that occurs. And I wonder to what degree sort of that finding a way to harness that information as a way of detecting risk in an organization in some way that I don't know the around confidentiality what can be done, but it seems that a lot of time fraud is an open secret, and there are people who understand and know what is happening, and that information may or may not make it through. And by the time it occurs, it's 12 months in. By the time you get to an inspection of an audit firm that may or may not be failing a specific organization, company. And so I just wonder if part of our standard setting should take into account that information and how that becomes a part of an audit more formally than just let's have a meeting and tell me if you think anything is happening. And this is just something for consideration because I can't really tell you how this could happen. But it just seems to me that that is a way of finding hotspots, both geographically and sectorally that we could use as as a standard setting institution.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is, based on my understanding and my experience, anything that is considered, firms have processes and policies to deal with whistleblowers, right? And those have improved year to year. And it's a requirement that the audit firm, when they go in to do their assessment, the risk assessment at the beginning, their planning, whatever, to ask that specific question. And in fact, for every quarterly review, for example, part of the letter of representation includes that specific question. Were there any whistleblowers? Are there any issues that we need to be aware of? And that follows, obviously, and is communicated to the audit committee, right? We, as regulators, when we go in to do the inspection, the first thing we ask is we basically ask the same question. And the reason we ask that question is to make sure that the audit firm asks the right questions, right? Because it should be one and the same. And of course, both the audit firm and us have full access to all of that information. So it's part of, let's say, the standard auditing process currently. But I totally get your point because ultimately it's those sorts of concerns, along with restatements, that are indicators of problems, right? So we need to reconsider. We'll make a note and we'll see how we can bake it into this modernization of the inspection process. Perhaps there needs to be some sort of an emphasis there as well.
Thanks. Nemat?
Thanks, Sabah. So I think, I don't know which of the 7 questions this falls under, but if there is a way to revisit the idea of firm and engagement level quality metrics, the disclosure of that, adding to, I think, what Satyam said as well, information about just firms' use of AI, even if it's just data collected within the organization at the PCAOB, and then you can decide at a later stage as to what needs to be disclosed or not disclosed. I think that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Namat. Helpful feedback. Ken, do you still have your?
Miss here. I sort of thinking that we're answering that general question. I gave some of my comments, I think, to an email. So I'm going to give a couple, 3 comments, food for thought. If I think about where we're going in the next, I guess, 4 years, I do think you're going to have to face up to AI and cyber, how it affects all the audits. I think we have to figure that out. It's going to get, we talked about earlier today, but I think thinking about how you work, how you do your job, how the auditors do their job, how companies do their preparation is, I would have to say, first and foremost. Another hot button of mine, and I'll just bring it up, is, there's an issue of quarterly versus semi-annual reporting. I think it misses the point. I think that I have been doing this actually for 50 years, so I got you beat by 10. And it used to be a 10Q was 30 pages. 10K, maybe 50. I review now, because I'm on so many boards, they're all over 100 pages. Not to mention the proxy. Proxy used to be also 20, 30 pages. It's now well over 100 pages. I think someone has to look at, and it's easy to keep on adding. We just add. Nothing gets subtracted. I don't know whose problems it comes, but I think between the PCAOB and SEC has to think about, are we really making life in public so complicated? Not because of quarterly and semi-annually, but because the filings are so, they're so extensive. 10 risk factors. They have 40 to 50 pages. We try to simplify. Anyone looks in this room, go look at it. Go look at risk factors. I dare you to look at risk factors, and I dare you to find what the really important ones are. So anyway, I just want to bring that up. The last point I want to make is I was thinking about private equity investing in accounting firms, and I was thinking about that and how professional leagues did it. Professional leagues say you can invest in us, but you're passive. You have no influence on the team. And yet I'm seeing, I usually like, I sort of always like free market, but I must admit, I am a little concerned about where this may entail. And so far, none of them have gone after Big Six, Big Four, whatever. But I am concerned that we might get ourselves, like, and now there's a lot of issues on medical and healthcare. States are saying you can't invest. So far, we're very quiet here. No one has even talked about, to my knowledge, is there any restrictions on private equity firms, maybe venture firms, investing in accounting firms, or auditing firms, or whatever term. So those are sort of things that I'm not sure where it comes under, but I think these are things that I think about that will affect the profession going forward.
Ken, if I can just hit on the last point. Actually, my former firm, Ernst & Young, almost went through a split a couple of years ago.
I remember that well. It was not fun.
It was not fun at all, especially for a retired partner like myself, right? So I was very involved in the process, obviously, and openly against the split. But it would have involved private equity firms coming in with hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So as much as all the accounting firms, when they came in to present to us last week, they all talked up and down, especially the Big Four, about the value of the multidisciplinary firm, therefore totally against the split. But we have to be realistic. The dynamics of the profession, the dynamics of the economy, there's so many factors that, for me, I would not be surprised if something like that came up again with one of the big firms. And it has huge implications, right? From an enforcement point of view, at the end of the session last week in Paris, I asked all these regulators, there were 45, 50 of them. I said, how many of you have the authority to stop an investment of private equity into one of your accounting firms? And the answer was, I think one. I think maybe the Netherlands or somebody has some rules that would allow them. Otherwise, we don't have that authority. And the only thing we can do is obviously we need to be sensitive to it. And it goes back to our QC 1000. We need to be thinking, it's almost like the private equity firm needs to come in, if they are interested, and look through the QC 1000 requirements and all the other auditing standards and say, can we operate in this environment and make money? Right? Because they need to have, at a minimum, they need to have all of those things, because that's where we come in. If we come in and they're not meeting those requirements, for example, they're putting pressure on the audit partner to limit the amount of work that they do, it's a red flag. It's a problem, right? And theoretically, we have an opportunity to shut him down at some point, right? Or shut him down through the business by issuing a bad report or whatever. It gets extremely complicated. We'll see how things develop in the next few years, but again, it's part of the overall challenge, and it does tie back to your first point, which is AI, right? AI and cybersecurity, how do we do the audits, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you.
David, do you still have your question? So I'll go back to Steve and then Gary Wall.
Excuse me, to Ken's point, and our self-selecting group, I guess I feel like I'm in a safe space. I can admit this. I do read the risk factors. And, you know, one of the things that you find out is that mostly it's a copy and paste from the prior year. But with all of that information, one thing that you can do, I mean, I'm not worried about being inundated with too much information at all, especially with AI. For example, you can learn some interesting things if you upload the risk factors from the last 5 years annuals and say, tell me how they've changed. That says something. I remember when earnings season is always demanding, but you would have to somehow, you know, juggle your time because you'd have to listen to these calls. And then finally you could get transcripts, and then you could get them almost immediately after the call. And now, which I'm doing this earnings season, you can have AI give you a quick but detailed summary of the transcript. We're not going to be overwhelmed with information. We're going to be able to process it and evaluate it very, very quickly. That I don't think is going to be an issue. And as far as quarterly filings, I mean, so much of that is going to be automated anyway. You know, companies are used to making these quarterly filings. It's not a burden at this point. It's a routine, and it's only going to be accelerated and made easier by AI, right?
Thank
Let me
you.
just do a quick, I was relating more to the burden of the people preparing the remarks. I think you're talking about people reading them. And yes, we all do red lines. So yes, I understand that quite well. But I'm just telling you, the companies, if the SEC wants more companies to go public, there's only 4,000 companies public today. It used to be 8,000. You got to think about what it entails and why companies are not going public. There's a whole bunch of reasons. I won't go through it right now, but there are a bunch of reasons. One of which is the complexity of all the reports, all the reporting you have to do. That's all I'm making the point from preparers, not from reading it like you, because you're just going through, like all of us do, basically the red line.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. But again, a lot of it, you see they're just repeating the material because the business fundamentally hasn't changed. So from a preparation point of view, I don't know that the workload is increasing.
Jeff, Gary.
Thank you, Sal. Just re-emphasize a couple points that I think have already been made. So first, the IASB and whether the PCAOB should do a wraparound of their standards rather than produce their own standards. I saw that I think this was an accurate quote, the chief accountant of the SEC indicated that there were, at least in his view, some governance issues and some funding issues with respect to that. So I think, you know, we're a governance organization. We have best practices in governance, including with respect to standard setting. So my view, and I think Sandy said so I may just be repeating, but I think if there are governance issues and funding issues, those need to be resolved before the PCAOB does some type of wraparound of international standards. At least that would be my recommendation. And based on our existing CI policies, I would have to oppose greater use of the IASB standards without the governance and the funding being resolved. Harmonization, I spent a lot of time in my career involved in harmonization of accounting standards. It was an incredibly difficult process. I think the success may be that, you know, when I was much younger, we had auditing standards setters in all of Europe and different parts of the world. And now for the most part, it's US and IASB, and then countries do variations of the IASB, but we have narrowed down the set of accounting standards. That wasn't easy to do, took a long time, but it was a very difficult process, and I wouldn't underestimate, I know auditing standards are different, I wouldn't underestimate how hard this might be. To Sandy's point, you know, some of the issues we ran into were legal, political, and cultural. And those three things, hard to imagine, but those three things made it very, very difficult to harmonize accounting standards. I think we got as best as you could, where we have US GAAP, we have international standards, and then countries around the world tweak the international standards. That's probably as good as you're going to get. That said, can PCOB learn from what's going on at the IAASB and elsewhere? Absolutely, and they should talk to each other, communicate, try to find best ideas and pursue them. That's all good. But, if you're talking about harmonization, a single set of high quality auditing standards, my response is good luck. Good luck. Sure.
Just because it's relevant here, is what many people don't realize, and in going through the funding issues with the IAASB and the PIOB, is we talk about international standards, like what the IAASB publishes is what countries adopt, and I agree with Jen's comment about endorsement in a particular country. But international audit opinions do not say ISIS. They say UK ISIS, they say Canadian ISIS. They don't have a brand, which is investors understand what IFRS is, and they'll see PCAOB standards in the opinion. They may not pay as much attention to them, but there is no uniform brand to investors of international standards.
Thank you, Sandy.
My final point, it goes to standards, and it's just to repeat what I said earlier, that public information provided from your standards, from your inspection reports, can be useful to institutional investors in making voting decisions. So you can produce material information for institutional investors with respect to their voting decisions, as I mentioned, on audit committee chair and members and on ratification of the external auditor. So from my perspective, any PCAOB auditing standard that provides more public information that can be used by institutional investors for voting in any of those three areas are the types of standards that I would strongly support. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Gary, and then David.
We've talked a little bit in this meeting about the attractiveness of the profession to college graduates. And I know George and I have talked about the outreach efforts that are taking place with students. I want to emphasize that we need to do more. Our firm has roughly 15 to 20 interns every year, and it seems like the best of them are dual major accounting and finance, and they're debating whether or not they pursue accounting or finance, and they're looking at what will give them the best general business experience. And they are rewarded for an extra year of school by having pay that doesn't come close to what the investment banking salaries are. And I know there's a difference in terms of the lifestyle, but I think we need to do more about promoting the attractiveness of the industry. I've seen what has happened with Landman. That show has really transformed that profession. I don't know if that's for a good thing or a bad thing, and I don't know if we can have a auditor a version of that. But
the Netflix show Auditor.
I think we
could. No one would watch it. Yeah.
I think it's a great profession, a great way to start one's career, and I think we ought to do more to promote that.
Thank you, Gary.
Can I just add one point? I mean, I just want to say that the 150-hour rule, if that's what you're referring to, that is very costly, and to the extent barriers can be reduced to get people in accounting, that's it's very helpful. There's a lot of evidence to support the idea that the 150-hour rule is not helpful.
Yeah, the only thing I will say, what I heard from the accounting firms last week in Paris is that while they support that we need to get away from 150 hours to get more people interested in everything else, they're also struggling, and we kind of talked about this here as well, is how do we prepare the young people to come into the profession with more technology, knowledge, and especially AI? Is there an opportunity to do some more of that? And I sat on the board of the largest Catholic university in America until I took this job for like 10 years. And we were struggling to figure out how do we get resources to teach AI? Because if the kids were to take 4 years of, let's say, accounting or 5 years overall and incorporate AI, they would make a lot more money. But it seems that there's not, we talk about lack of resources, there's not even enough professors that are available out there to teach AI. I don't know if that's true or not. This is your domain.
Oh, we should keep it that way. I mean,
But a lot of that is already going on online.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, kids are getting on and they're attending classes online and they're learning. They want to know and they want to learn.
And the number of courses now that incorporate AI into existing curriculum is, for many of my colleagues, I see this happening throughout. I think the academic profession is certainly catching up to the demand.
Stanford has a great online AI curriculum. Anybody can get it on YouTube.
David?
But on the East Coast.
I hear MIT, small, somewhat obscure school in the East Coast, is quite an impressive curriculum.
Yeah, no, I was just going to comment. And I think it was commented on in the in some of the email exchanges before this meeting. But if you think about the firms that the PCAOB inspects, some of their largest, most important clients are not public companies. They are the big private equity complexes. I mean, Blackstone or KKR, et cetera, are enormously influential and important clients because they frequently, sort of dictate not just who audits the firm itself, but who audits the portfolio companies. And so I don't know where it's going to fit into the strategic plan, and I know the name of this organization, but we have to, I think about the obligation we have to investors in, private credit, private equity. Do we have an obligation to them? If so, how do we sort of execute on it? Presumably the work that we do inspecting the firms and their methodologies and procedures inures to the benefit of private investors and public investors. But I think we're probably behooves us to be more sort of explicit about that.
We currently have no mandate, as you know, for private, but I think through the influence, your influence, for Congress and such, there's no other place right now, right? Than for the PCAOB to take on a responsibility, just like we did years ago with credit, with brokers and dealers.
Yeah. Jim, just a quick follow-up on Nemit's comment about the 150 hours. There's an interesting experiment, I'm going to say, that's been underway now in Canada for, if I'm not mistaken, more than a decade, where previously for the chartered accounting designation, you had to do your, to get your time at a public accounting firm. Now they've broadened it out in terms of where you can get those hours. So that was sort of, it was driven by a couple of other issues, but that was an interesting kind of approach to still get experience or the relevant experience, but widen out the options that the student has.
Where did they widen it to?
Very broad. Everything from a governmental organization to a private company to a public accounting firm. And of course, simultaneously, what has happened is that the public accounting firm structures have changed in terms of what's permissible, in terms of how you can be set up, i.e. licensed to audit versus just focusing on tax versus focusing on insolvency or other advisory. So it's really broad, like it's really changed the landscape in terms of what's happening.
Jana? And then we'll move to the next two questions because I do think they're interconnected and a lot of it has been discussed earlier during the day.
Thank you. I thought I'd just attempt to connect some dots here. So we were talking about how we want to raise the profession's profile, attractiveness, attract the best and the brightest, give them the work that they're just going to dive into and love and add value to themselves, but to investors and the public markets. And I'm just wondering if a lot of times the value is added at intersections, or sometimes it's said another way, sometimes failures are where there are gaps. Right? And as we think broadly, and I really do applaud this strategic planning process, I'm just wondering if there might be some opportunities that are either exciting opportunities that we can own or take a lead in, or maybe some gaps that are out there that are needed that maybe we could fill maybe by thinking about what really is our mandate and figuring out a way to squeeze it in. And so, so this notion of risk, like on the investors, the first thing I do is I go to the CAMs. I am boring, yes, so I read this stuff too. I get excited by it. But I go to the CAMs first, and then I read the management, MD&A. But the MD&A is, and I do look at the risk factors. And the risk factors, I do exactly what you do, what's different. And but what I think what investors are looking for is the interpretation, internal consistency. So yeah, we do this part of the financial statements, but actually I'm looking at the CAMs, and are the CAMs related to the MD&A, and are they related to the risk factors? And which of the risk factors are really risks, and which is just legal gobbledygook that they must put out there? And some interpretation is what would be very, very helpful. And I think it would elevate the profile of the profession. And I think would attract really great people into the profession and keep great people. And so some examples, so the mechanism is the elaborating on how you think about risk and how you prioritize the inspections. There's something there. But there's also the time frame issue. So we focus on a 1 year, but ETF investors, long-term investors, bigger part of the capital markets, they do have a longer term time frame, even though of course there is the near-term focus, but it's near, medium, and long-term. And when we think about directors, we're holding them accountable for all of the above, including me, I guess. And but there is very much a short-term focus in the financial statements. And the question is, and let's just take the private credit, like public companies are buying private companies. Sometimes I look at the financials of these private companies, they're terrible. It's like, where did this come from? Who was the auditor on that? Was it a Big Four auditor? Sometimes it is a Big Four auditor. I know that some of the auditors they're all approaching public and private differently. Some are splitting the practices. Some are, I've heard, reducing the standard. I don't know what exactly it is, but that impacts public markets. We're going to have these huge private IPOs. That's incredible. Again, what are they? I don't have visibility into their marketing as a public company investor, but I should, because it's going to impact all of our lives. And then on the AI front, for example, just another sort of an emerging risk. I'd love some. So you mentioned how all of this is dependent on AI data centers and getting the power and the NIMBY, all this. Like, that's a real risk. We know that's a real risk, but that's not really addressed in the financial statements. I don't think it is. Maybe it should be somehow. I'd say, again, part of this thinking about risk. So I just put it up there because I do see that there's a huge need for interpretation, and AI will make space for interpretation if we have the right people. But actually getting that right, giving investors that information that is interpretive and how you think about it, I think that would be so very valuable. And it's both the opportunity and the challenge.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I understand your expectations. Obviously, there's no question. There is an expectations gap, always has been, between, what the investors want and need versus what the accounting world, the accounting firms are offering. It gets complicated. It's been, talked about for years. I don't know that expectations gap has closed much. Our dilemma as the regulators is that we can only follow the firms, and we can only challenge the extent of their audit procedures, including, of course, if there's adequate disclosures. But they're following a checklist, essentially, of what they should disclose. And I think what you're asking for is there a better articulation of those disclosures that should be made that would be more informative? But that's more for the FASB and the SEC to interpret, and for us, based on those rules, to come along and say, did you do a good enough job?
What I heard, this must be my first time, so excuse me. I don't, I'm just learning. But what I did hear is that when we set our investigation when we set our audit priorities and we set our investigation priorities, we are reading all of that contextual information. We are bringing our accounting firms I spent 10 years at PwC, Cooper's, and then
Mhm.
PwC.
Sure.
We are bringing our industry knowledge. We are bringing our global experts everywhere. But I think that the way to postulating is an idea that a way to squeeze it in is explaining that process and making it come alive. And that process, by focusing on all of these really important risks, showing how you think about it, could be a little bit of a fulcrum point that is within the mandate.
It is, I think, through the way I think about it is a lot of that should come through the responsibilities and the mandate the audit committees have. The audit committees need to have to take time. Somebody mentioned earlier the concept of education. At least when I was back in the profession, we would take time with the audit committee to do an educational session, right? Most of the time together with the management of the company, right? So we would sit down and say, okay, these are the developing issues, AI, whatever the case might be. These are the questions that you should be asking as an audit committee, including, in this case, of course, disclosures and things like that. So hopefully the SEC is following up accordingly, and the audit committees are taking up their responsibility to work with management and the external auditors to ask those questions, because those are critical questions. There's no I totally agree. And then for us, I guess, in terms of our inspection, we ought to be looking, and I think we are looking at the documentation that comes out of those discussions, because there's minutes of the audit committee meetings. And in order to test the effectiveness of the law, we should be in the mandate, we should be looking at those minutes to make sure that there's adequate discussions with the audit committee.
There's just one more, and I come here again with so much respect for this group, and thank you again for having me. But I'm not sure that the audit committees are all equally knowledgeable about their investors. Coming into an audit committee, I was surprised at how little they knew about the investors. They make a lot of assumptions about investors, and a lot of audit committees don't want to talk to investors. And so it's some of the stuff that they were saying about what investors are thinking. They don't understand investor organizational structures. So nobody can understand an organizational structure, but they don't understand investor organization structures and how investment decisions are made. And they might hear from an investor, an analyst. They will hear from a small group of investors, but they might be missing the broader group of investors.
It's possible.
Tim, if I could make a reflection on this before we move on. I'll certainly say for me, it's extremely helpful to hear the context of, SEC quarterly reporting, audit committees. I kind of look at it as our responsibility at PCAOB as we look to the strategic plan to filter out what is statutorily our responsibility. So maybe this is my pre-way of saying, please submit anything you want and everything you want to the strategic plan comment period, understanding there's some of it we can't legally do. But I do want to welcome the conversation because it helps me place our role within the context of everybody else's. But that's just to understand that I simply don't expect any of you to have, checked with your lawyer ahead of time to make sure your comments are within our statutory mandate. That's our job.
Super helpful. David, I saw you. Did you? Okay. That leads me to the last question in the interest of time. How can the PCAOB enhance transparency with its stakeholders? Ken?
Yeah, I've said this before. I think to get more out and about, it's very simple. I think most of my audit committee friends have never had a meeting with PCAOB. I think to travel across the good old US of A and meet with audit committees, find a way to do this. There's great places in most of the big cities. But I think to do that would be very, very helpful. I think the more you can communicate, honestly, I see from both FASB and FASIC, I actually, a lot of the meeting, like this meeting is public, so I actually attend a lot of those. So I think the great benefit of webinars and so forth and on the web is you can get online for everybody. But I would just recommend more in-person meetings with audit committees, so you can hear from them, or audit committees. I say it that way. You can hear from them directly, just like we have in a meeting here, what their concerns are, and you can also tell how you think. I'll make one more point, which is an interesting, it's funny, when I first got involved here, and Jim, you'll be interested, I would hear from the auditors, all the complaining about PCAOB. It was just unbelievable. And they would just use excuses upon excuses. And being involved here, I have a much more firsthand impression of what this organization is set out to do, whether it's you or your prior folks. And I've been involved a couple of different times now with PCAOB. I was on the SAG earlier. And so so I've had the benefit of hearing firsthand, as many in this, all of us in the room have, but most people don't. So I think to help educate the auditors, the audit committee members, so they have the benefit of what we have in this room, would be a big, big positive.
I think I was telling somebody earlier today, my goal, and again, I'm going to spend some time with my board members on this topic, but my goal is to be out of this office at least 50% of the time once I get through the transition period. And we put a strategic plan together and we have a budget together, and all of that hopefully by the end of June or sometime. I think it's required by July. But after maybe some vacation in the summer, after that, I want to be out 50% of the time. I want to be talking primarily to the audit committees. My group has heard me so many times talk about this. I want a list of all the audit committee chairs for all the public companies in America. I want to invite them to conferences, to do conferences around the country, and invite them to come and join and demystify, if that's the right term, what do we do? We need to have this direct interaction with them, because otherwise, let's face it, eventually, as somebody said from the accounting firms, they're going to tune us out. And that would be the worst possible scenario, right? So that's what I intend to do. That's what I think we're going to have to do. And I think it's appropriate. And I was telling somebody even at the break here today that in my mind, when I was working in the profession, I would, think about 24/7, certainly wake up in the morning and think about my clients, and more specifically, the audit committee chair. The audit committee chair of my client was the most important person other than my family. And I worked towards making sure that they knew what we were doing, how we were doing it, that we would communicate with them all the time, before and after the audit committee meetings. They drove so many things, right? And in the PCAOB, I struggled to figure out, okay, who's my client? And ultimately, my client is you guys. You're the investors and the audit committees. Some of you, of course, overlap. So that's my mindset. We work for the audit committees and investor groups that represent the investors. And that's what we protect through helping the firms, monitoring the firms, regulating the firms to make sure that they do the best job possible in terms of audit quality. I don't know if that's helpful, Ken, but that's what I'm intent to do.
Thank you, Jim. Jen, Jason, and Jeff and Sandy.
So I think it is a really great idea to plan to be out of the office most of the time doing outreach. I think that's a fantastic thing. I really, though, I would just make one amendment to what you just said, right? Which is that your primary audience is not audit committees, so it's investors, right? And the goal of this organization is investor protection. And so I would suggest that your primary audience should be investors, not the audit committees. And your client is the investor. The audit committee is a part of the governance process that oversees the auditors who you inspect, but both the audit committee and yourselves are doing that on behalf of the investor. So please don't, I'm not saying they're not an important part of the ecosystem. Clearly they are. They are elected by investors. but we have to keep absolute front and center goal that the purpose is investor confidence. And I think if there's a sense that the investor is not the core of it all, that's when you would there's no point in having an audit if it's not for the investors. The audit's not for the audit committee.
And that's just to jump in. That's not a harder argument to make, right? You can draw a direct line from the activities of the PCAOB and the cost of capital and the reliance of the U.S. markets and why they're the most attractive in the world and have the lowest cost of capital and all of that. You also, promote the organization in the most fundamental kind of marketing 101 ways. Is this video going to be posted? Is it going to be boosted on social media? Is it going to be broken down into individual videos that are promoted? What other videos are going to come out or scheduled for the next month talking about different things that you do, value that you add, just basic marketing, making it very clear and easy to understand terms, how the organization holds value.
And seek to do investor conferences, right? So it's interesting you say that the international standard setters do investor conferences all the time, all around the world. You guys don't. And you come and do our conferences. I'm sure you can do Sandy. You've got to get out in front of the investors.
Yeah, point well taken. And it's interesting. Saba and I had this discussion last night, and I said to her, okay, I know there must be a database of audit committee chairs, and we must be able to find some way to get that information. And my question to her was, okay, can you give me the list of investor groups where we can do the same? Because we need to find that group as well, right? So I'm not prioritizing one or the other. They're both important, but we need to get to those investor conferences. And you guys, you need to help us, right? You call out on me and I'll work out the appropriate meetings.
I actually think it's easier, and I do think you should prioritize investors over the audit committees, at least in the near term, while you guys are brand new and you're setting your new plan, given the goal. But I think, actually within this advisory group, you've got 3 of the biggest investor networks going. Okay. So we ought to be able to help you with that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason?
So let me tack onto that a little bit as well. What we talk about is the inspection report, if it's usable, all the data in it, the signal and the noise. I don't want to cut back on data, although I find a lot of it not super helpful. In my day job, I'm representing 45 trillion in assets for our members. They're not reading these reports. They think the audit quality is fine. That's a pretty good signal there that I think we've done a lot of great stuff over the last 20 years. I think, something like Part 1C, where you have foot fault independence matters getting reported in a report that were caught by their own internal controls. Who needs to know that? Maybe the audit committee does know that. They get reported on that kind of stuff. That makes a lot of sense. So I think I encourage you all and the staff, as you're going through this process, think about really what's material. To me, that's a restatement, right? That's a trend in quality. To me, it's the large accelerated files. It's the MAG 7, right? These are kind of the risks to me. This is if 50% of the US is invested in index funds and the weight is, to the MAG 7 the way it is, those are the risks, right? A small cap with a small auditor, that's significantly less risk to the capital markets. And that's how I think about it. So I just encourage you to do that. And then number 2 is an impossible task. And I'm sorry to ask you to do this, but whatever you do over the next 2.5 years, stress test it across the aisle, because I think the flip-flopping that what we've seen over the last, 7, 8 years, it's not helpful for anyone. And I think, if you can reach across the aisle, if you can reach out to all stakeholders, if you can build some kind of consensus around what's reasonable for all parties, so it will be sticky in 2.5 years, 6.5 years, whenever that time comes. I think that's just super important. And I think you're thinking about it in the right ways. You come from the profession. And I love to hear that because I'm thinking about investors. I'm thinking about these audit firms that need to implement. I'm thinking about having lasting, rules, policies, procedures, so people can operationalize. So whatever you can do on the impossible task, we would appreciate that as well.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jason. Thank you. We are almost over time. So Jeff, Alicia, and Sandy, and that will be the last word. Thank you.
Thank you, Saba. So CII is having their fall conference in Boston, so I'm putting you down for attending. Okay. Just want to make sure. With respect to question 7, I would encourage you to, you may have already done this, I would read Dennis Beresford's letter. He was the chairman of the FASB when I started there. I have a great deal of respect for him. And what he says in his letter, I think he said many times in the past, I have as well to various PCAOB chairmen over the years. But I just read you a key part. He says, open deliberations where staff recommendations are actively discussed and challenged lead to better outcomes and a more informed constituency, adding that the board should consider increasing the transparency and interactivity of its meetings and to move away from what may appear to observers as an overly legalistic process with board members mainly reading from prepared scripts. As such, greater openness combined with enhanced external engagement should improve both the quality and the credibility of the PCAOB standards. I agree with that statement 100%. I think he said it several times throughout the history of the PCAOB. I have as well, and we've seen very little movement in response to that.
Jeff, first of all, Dennis Beresford was one of my idols. He was my mentor. The first person I'd called when I got this offer, this opportunity. I've been talking to him regularly. He sent me a very long, nice letter that I just read again last night. I could not agree more. I hope that today's session, which was my first, gave you an indication that I'm listening to him, and also what we put out in terms of my first open meeting back in March 31st of what do we want to do. This is absolutely critical between the investor groups, the audit committees, all the stakeholders. If we're not listening to you, we should not exist. And so thank you for that. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Alicia,
I'm going to go visit with him, by the way. I haven't set a date, but probably next month.
Alicia and Sandy, and then we have to end the meeting. Thank you.
Very quickly, the PCAOB has the interest of all investors. And second, the communication strategy, I think the priority is refreshing the entire communication strategy before the PCAOB gets out there. Because I think it would be relevant and important to be able to have a more solid foundation as you move out to talk to the various constituencies.
Thank you. Sandy?
Yeah, I was going to agree with everything that Jen said, and I was going to add one thing. I know it's rare, right, Jen? Oh, is that one of the greatest challenges you have with investors in seeking feedback is they see so little of the audit.
Yeah.
And so a different approach needs to be taken with them. They're not stupid, right? They're not confused. They just don't have much information because audit is a credence good, right? And they need to be, we need more transparency to hold our agents, which are the audit committee, more accountable, right? And I would think is it Diana? Is it Diana? Her comments with respect to audit committees are really important. There's a vast difference in quality of audit committee members. They are chosen for a variety of different reasons. Investors do not put them on the slate necessarily. And so you have to remember that they don't have the same perspective and they don't necessarily talk to investors. So I would keep that in mind. I would also say that it's very important. The IAG has been a very important element of the process for investors. And some they'll say that we're not investors at times, we're investor advocates. I find that troubling because it's meant to be a bit diminutive in my mind. But in reality, we're no different than the national office because they're not out doing audits, right? They're advocating for the firms. Certain audit organizations are auditor advocates. They're not auditors, right? It is a different language. It is a different challenge. it is a different degree of connection and attention. And our organizations take a great deal of time, because it's integral to our credibility, to make sure that we get the feedback we need to develop a position. And so I think that it's important to say that. And I think that the conversation here, where you can get those different perspectives, is really like no other. Because when you go and get a group of people together, you'll have to start with some of them who the PCAOB is, right? But if you ask them a question in a specific way about what they're getting and what it means and the like, then you'll get a much richer response, which we do in our surveys. So to enhance transparency is give them what they need to give you a meaningful response, ask them a question in a way in which they can respond, and embrace that they may not know as much about audit as you do, but they know a lot about investing.
No, I'm telling you, this is, I've been here for 2.5 months, and this has been probably my most valuable day. I mean, nothing against my colleagues or anybody else. No, seriously, I mean,
thought that's because we are here today.
anxious to come together. And I'm looking forward to more such meetings, because that's what brings challenge and validation to what we do. And for me, at a personal level, given the circumstances, I guess, I was thinking, you know, is this important? Am I important? And what you've said through your questions and your comments, it gives me a lot more confidence to think, yes, this is important. It's not theoretical. It's not just in my mind, right? It's needed for the 70-some trillion dollars that we all strive to support and protect. And so, yeah, this has been a lot of fun, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to every single one of you for coming here and contributing significantly. Thank you. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Hey, Jim, the question I remember, I don't